I will be reading Matthew chapter 4, verse 23 through Matthew chapter 5, verse 12. I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Translation of God's Holy Word, and I invite you all to listen for the Word of God. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, curing every disease and every sickness among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria. And they brought to him the sick, those who were afflicted with various diseases and pains, demoniacs, epileptics, paralytics, and he cured them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee, from the Decapolis, from Jerusalem and Judea, and from beyond Jordan. And when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him, and then he began to speak, and he taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Let's pray. O holy God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be holy and acceptable to you, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I grew up in Central Arkansas, and I attended a one-room, a church that met in a one-room church building. We didn't have indoor plumbing. This was a small place. And every year about this time in October, we would have what they called a revival. Some people call them camp meetings. They used to have them out back in the Brush Harbor, but that was before I discovered America. We had already moved inside and discovered air conditioning by that time. So we were meeting inside. And if you're not sure what a revival or a camp meeting is, it's when the way we did it, we had a guest speaker that would come in, and they would preach every night, starting on Wednesday, and we would meet all the way through Sunday. And this was not a kumbaya love sort of moment. This was all hellfire and all damnation all the time. And I remember as a child being absolutely terrified. And I didn't realize until later that was the goal. The goal was literally to scare the hell out of you. They wanted you to know that hell was such a bad place, you wanted nothing to do with that. And you would do whatever you needed to do to avoid that. And so I'm in the 6th grade, and I'm sitting there. And I don't know if it's, you may be able to tell me this, Allie. I think at a camp meeting you are required to sing at least 14 verses of Just As I Am. And so what they would do is at the end of the service, we would have an invitation, a come on down to Jesus moment. And so what they would do is we would sing Just As I Am. And I swear sometimes I think they would sing that until someone came down. But that night, I went down to the front and I said, I'd like to give my life to Christ. Now, I'm not going to say that my Christian journey began at that time, because I believe God was pursuing me long before I had a clue who God was. God had placed me in a Christian home, and I was growing up and being prepared since before I was even born. But taking that time in the 6th grade and looking at my life since then, I can very safely say I have never been persecuted. I've never had my life threatened because of my faith. I've never lost a job because of my faith. I've never been evicted by someone getting rid of the lousy Christians. I've had it pretty easy comparatively. You know, as we look at persecution, most of what we in the United States call persecution is what is labeled first world problems. Let me share with you some first world problems. First world problem might be, you know, the other day, I went to McDonald's and I didn't realize until I got home they gave me the wrong sauce for my chicken McNuggets. How horrible is that? And the trash system here in Whitney is horrible. When I recycle, I actually have to put my recyclables in a different bin and take them myself. I mean, who can live with this kind of stress? It's awful. And the other day, I was both shocked and appalled, both of those. We went out to eat lunch, and Amanda's sweet potato French fries were cold. That's just unforgivable. Those are first world problems. People in the rest of the world say, you had potatoes to eat. You got chicken nuggets and sauce. And they'll say, don't tell me about trash. Where do you think I sleep every night? We got it pretty easy here. I wish we could say there was no persecution, but sadly it exists. I just don't think it's what we call persecution. I don't think that's what Christ had in mind. Some of the Christian persecution, I looked for some examples in the United States. This is what I found. That Best Buy in 2006 removed the word Christmas from its holiday print advertising. That is what we call persecution? Really? Really? Starbucks. Yeah, okay, now you're going to get me going here. Starbucks, I cannot believe they had the audacity to do this. They removed snowflakes and reindeer from their holiday cups last year. I was practically infuriated by the whole thing. I mean, those are strong Christian symbols, snowflakes and reindeer. They speak to our faith, and when they remove those, I could not believe it. I was ready to boycott Starbucks. Oh, maybe not. I really like Starbucks a lot. That's what we call persecution. The closest I could come up with is an example in Oklahoma where the Christian politicians in Oklahoma vowed to fight the state Supreme Court decision to remove a large monument of the Ten Commandments from the Capitol grounds. The reason they did this was the move came after the Satanic Temple said it intended to donate a massive statue of a goat-headed demonic deity to the state capitol if the officials allowed the Ten Commandments to stay. So they removed the Ten Commandments. And the Satanic Temple decided that they wouldn't put their statue on the state grounds. Instead, they're looking to put it on the Arkansas Capitol state grounds around there. None of this is good. I'm not saying it's good. But I'm saying when we talk about persecution and suffering, I don't think Jesus was talking about us getting a cup without a reindeer on it. I think he might have had something a little bit stronger in mind. And if you look, you don't have to look very far. You don't have to look beyond the evening news to find examples of Christians being persecuted. And folks, it's not getting any better. It is not getting any better. CNN World News reported that in 2015, Christian persecution reached a record high since they had been keeping records. Last year was the most violent for Christians in modern history, rising to a level of, quote, ethnic cleansing. According to a new report, in total, the survey found more than 7,100 Christians, 7,100, were killed in 2015 for faith-related reasons. Over 7,000 people lost their lives because they love Jesus. That's up from 3,000 the year before. So in the last 2 years, these are the ones that we know of. These are the ones that we can count. These are the ones we have names for. Over 10,000 people lost their lives because they say, I love Jesus Christ. And you want to talk to me about Starbucks cups? Really? Persecution exists. It is real. People suffer because of their faith. Another report coming from the Huffington Post. And by the way, you notice that neither of these are extremely conservative news reporting entities. CNN and the Huffington Post reported that there were in Cuba, let's see, Cuba is what, a whole whopping 50 miles off the Florida coast? This is in our backyard in Cuba. In 2014, there were 220 violations of religious liberties. 220 in 2014. Oh, hang on. There were 2,300 last year. 10 times more. Many of which involved entire churches or cases of arrest and dozens of victims. And in 2011, there were 40. So we've gone from 40 in 2011 to 2,300 in 2014. And it's largely due to the government declaring 2,000 Assembly of God churches illegal, ordering the closure or demolition of 100 Assembly of God churches in 3 provinces, and expropriating the properties of a number of other denominations, including Baptist conventions and, oh, hang on, United Methodists. We still want to talk recycling at this point? Do we still want to talk about Best Buy not greeting me with the way I want to be greeted at Christmas time when people are dying around the world? The Cuban regime has also increasingly targeted church leaders and the members of the churches for the first time in years, jailing pastors and detaining many members. In early January, 2 churches were destroyed and church members arrested. 3 church leaders were held incommunicado. And some pastors' homes were surrounded, roads were blocked, cell phones were disrupted, and children were arrested. One of the government's more odious practices, according to the study, has been to threaten churches with closure if they do not comply with government demands to expel and shun specific individuals. You see, because the Cuban government heard that Keith may have said something a little bit bad about Fidel Castro. We don't like that. So unless you throw him out of here, we're going to shut you down. They're strong-arming the Christians in Cuba. This is persecution. This is what Christ was talking about. This is what he's talking about when blessed are those who are persecuted. People whose faith is so strong, they're going to live their faith regardless. They don't care what happens to them. I'm going to live my faith out the way that God intended. And I'm going to claim Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And you can do whatever you want to me. And I will never give up my faith. That's what he's talking about. See, it doesn't matter if you're persecuted or whether or not you suffer. Because you got to remember, the Beatitudes are not a bargaining tool. It's not saying, well, if you'll do this, then you'll be blessed. Jesus is just spelling out the way that it is. People who are persecuted for their faith, they understand the kingdom of heaven. They get it. They live heaven on earth. Why? Because they know God loves them. It's not a if you suffer. If you decide to suffer, well, then you're going to be blessed. Because no person in their right mind is ever going to be made to suffer. And here's a news flash for you. God doesn't cause suffering. God doesn't cause people to be persecuted. And you're saying, oh, chapter 8, verse 28. Well, you don't have to look it up because I got it right here. Okay? And I even brought you King James because that's what most of us know. We have heard this verse over and over. I'll read it to you. And we know that all things work together for the good of them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. We know that all things work together. So what works together? All things. So the things are, what's with this? The things are working? No. hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the translators of the King James Bible got the wrong verb on that one. It's not the things that are working. It's God. God is the one who is active, not the stuff, not everything that's happening. It's God. God is the one who's good. God is the one who is working. And it doesn't matter what you throw at God, He's going to use it for good. I think that the Common English Bible got a little bit closer to what the actual words would say here. Let me read that one to you. We know that God works, not things. Not the things that happen, it's God that's working. We know that God works all things together for good, for the ones who love God, for the ones who are called according to His purpose. One more time, we know that God works all things together for good, for the ones who love God, for those who are called according to His purpose. You see, it doesn't matter how bad things are. It doesn't matter how evil things get. God is able to go in and say, evil doesn't have the last word. I'm going to bring something good out of whatever bad things happen, and you can't have anything so bad that God's not going to be able to go and work good. That's who God is. God doesn't just sit around and say, I think I'm going to arbitrarily cause some suffering today because they need to learn a lesson. Now, there are people that say, well, some things that are bad, all things that are bad is just part of some bigger plan that we don't understand. I'd like you to explain that to the families of 11 million Jews who were butchered in World War II. Tell me how that's good. Tell me how it's good ever in one instance. What can possibly be good enough to justify a sexual assault of a small child? There is nothing that could ever justify evil like that. God doesn't cause that, but God steps in and says, no, evil, you don't get the last word. I'm going to bring something good from this. I'm going to bring something good out of whatever evil is out there. Because if you haven't noticed, we live among a lot of evil. Our world is broken. And we're the ones that broke it. And we keep breaking it all the time. And God says, go ahead. I'm going to bring good out of this. And you know people who have been on the receiving end of all sorts of evil deeds. And you know what happens so many times when they work for rights of others. They have a voice that carries weight when they speak. When they offer consolence to someone. When they go to someone and say, I've been where you are and you can make it. Their words carry weight. Why? Because evil doesn't have the last word. God has the last word. And God can bring good from anything. Nothing is so bad that God cannot bring good from it. God doesn't cause it. I can only imagine that God's heart must have been just entirely broken when He looked down and saw 11 million Jews being butchered. That had to just crush God's heart. Or any time a child is harmed by someone as an act of evil, God doesn't cause those things. But God redeems those things. God says, I'm going to make some good come out of that. Evil doesn't ever have the last word. So when we look at persecution, when we look at this, when we look at all the things that it's saying here, blessed are those who are persecuted, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. No one chooses to be persecuted. No one chooses to suffer. We choose to live our faith. Or we choose not to. It's pretty much that simple. We either choose to live our faith regardless of the consequences, or we just kind of go with the flow. You don't get to have it both ways. What God is talking about, what I believe He's talking about here, is that faith that just can move mountains, that faith that people say, whoa, I got to give me some of that. See how they live their life? That's integrity. That's the same whether someone's watching or not. That is faith that puts my trust in my Savior, Jesus Christ. If suffering comes, it comes. If persecution comes, it comes. We live our faith regardless. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain. After he sat down, his disciples came to him. And then he began to speak, and he taught them, saying, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely. On my account, rejoice and be glad. For your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you."